Americans have become increasingly isolated socially.
Yeah.
And I think that it's really important to find a community, get a support group if you don't have a lot of friends and family around, and don't be alone. Don't walk this journey alone.
Mental health champions. I'm super excited because we're bringing back live stream today. It's for everyone on our LinkedIn channel. We're brought today by an incredibly inspiring person. I'm talking with Jenny, coast to coast, Florida, all the way out to California. But she has an amazing story to share because of the resilience she showed and is now continuing to make an impact. If you're live streaming, you see her book title right there. So we'll dive into that. But when her husband survived a fiery plane crash with burns over 80% of his body, Jenny became his caregiver and medical advocate. Forever Fly Free is her story of love, trauma, and resilience. She now advocates for burn survivors or donates proceeds to the Phoenix Society, which I think is amazing. She speaks on mental health, healing, and through trauma, caregiving, grief, and rediscovery. She will not only share fierce vulnerability, humor, and hope, but she also put it into her book. So with that, Jenny, welcome to the first live stream of fall 2025.
How exciting, Vincent. Thank you for having me on the podcast. I'm
I'm
excited to
excited.
be here.
Oh, I'm excited to have you as well. You took the words out of my mouth. Thank you for joining us and everyone viewing on today or tuning in once we go live next month. My name is Vincent A. Lancy, and this is a mental health break. Thank you for making this a top 5% global show. We can't do it without you, the listeners, the amazing guests that come forward. And I shared a bit of her story today. Of course, she has her own mental health story to share. And again, an awesome book that may just be on your bookshelf as soon as we stop this Zoom today. And now, Jenny, I want to dive right into it. Please share your mental health journey from wherever you feel comfortable.
Yeah, sure, Vincent. So, June of 2019, my husband and I, Mark, were about to retire, and it was an exciting time. He was a recreational pilot for 20 years, grew up on a dairy farm in Wisconsin. So I knew he was a responsible pilot because he'd been operating like tractors and farm equipment since he was 11, and was also an engineer by background. Anyway, before we were going to retire to Lake Tahoe, because we're avid skiers, hikers, outdoors type of people, he decided he wanted to fly to Scottsdale to go to the Mayo Clinic to get one of those one-day executive health checkups. And so he flew out there. He called me the day before, said, 3 thumbs up. I'm doing great. My health is perfect. All good. And the next day, he got on a flight out of Scottsdale Airport to fly back to Lake Tahoe, which would be Carson City. And I was in California at work at the time. And apparently, what I learned later was that he reported a rough running engine on his plane 7 minutes after takeoff out of Scottsdale and declared emergency and was directed to try to emergency land in a suburb north of Phoenix. He knew he wasn't going to make it, apparently, from what I heard from eyewitnesses. He tried to land on a 2-lane road in a suburb, and there were 3 drivers there. So he swerved to the right to avoid them. But by doing that, his plane lost balance and his right wing clipped 2 light poles and caught on fire because the fuel tanks are in the wings. And so the plane hit a concrete barrier, flipped upside down, and he crash landed face down. Now, the amazing thing about that day was that an amazing Good Samaritan named Thomas Honeycutt happened to be driving by with his partner. And he said, here it is, a June day, 95 degrees, hot Phoenix weather. He's in shorts and flip-flops, and he sees my husband's burning plane. And he said, oh my God, look at everybody filming. He got really angry. He said everybody was filming. Someone called 911, but he thought to himself, if I don't run out there and rescue the pilot, he's going to die. And so Thomas told me later he ran out there, but while he was running, he thought to himself, if the pilot still has his seatbelt on, he's hosed. I'm not going to be able to pull him out. And he said, literally, when he got to the cockpit window, which was completely cracked open, he saw my husband's seatbelt melt right off him in that moment. And he managed to grab him out of there. Thomas is 5'8", very buff jiu-jitsu champion. Mark was 6'2", 220 pounds. And on one haul, he got him out, pure adrenaline. 2 guys came running over, carried Mark across the road to safety, and the plane exploded. So it was pretty crazy. Mark survived, but with burns on over 80% of his body, third-degree burns. Luckily, the Arizona Burn Center was only a few miles away. They managed to get him there. And the amazing thing about Mark was he had the presence of mind to call me from ER. And here I was at work. I pick up the call and he says, "Something happened to the plane, Jenny. I love you and I'm in for a long, long recovery." And then he handed me over to the doctor. The doctor just said all this stuff in medical language that I didn't understand at all. I didn't even know what had happened to the plane. And he said, "I don't know what happened. We were just on the receiving end in ER." And I said, just tell me if his injuries are life threatening. That's all I need to know. And the doctor said, "Absolutely." So I said, "Okay, I'm on the first flight to Phoenix, right? As soon as I can." When I got out there, he was already in a medically induced coma because burn is one of the most traumatic injuries a human body can suffer. He was wrapped like a mummy. He was basically a giant mummy. And he was pretty much in a coma for the next 4.5 months and survived sepsis, multiple infections. I think the doctor tried to tell me the first 2 weeks he was going to die. He didn't. Mark is a fighter. He loves life. We both do. And, he got through. Somehow he survived blood clot, infections, etc. And then when he got to about 4.5 months, we were two-thirds into all his skin grafts. And skin graft technology is amazing these days. They can take a post-sized piece of skin and grow your skin in a lab and attach it to your body, and it grows like islands that join together in 4 to 6 weeks. Any case, so we were two-thirds of the way there. They did have to amputate his legs. I knew he was going to come home disabled. And at about 5 months, he caught a hospital infection that was resistant to antibiotics, and he was gone in 24 hours. So it was a huge shock for everybody. And during that time, I just wanted to say a lot of people ask me, "My God, how did you get through that roller coaster?" Because I did take a leave from work and I rented an Airbnb in Phoenix and I was at ICU with him every day. And I said, "You know what? The doctors did this for me. They modeled what I define as hope now." So, hope to me, which holds, still true for me today, 6 years later, is hope is not about expectation, but a belief in possibilities. And every time something happened, they would say there are three scenarios. He could make it could get worse, or it could go to this midterm situation, he had a fungal infection he almost died from. And they never said never, and they never said always. And that's kind of my definition of hope.
Well, thank you for sharing this and thank you for keeping his legacy alive. I know your whole world was turned around upside down overnight, seemingly, right? And
Yeah.
you went home and then the unexpected then happened. You are a fighter as well. I can see that. What are some things you began to do to take care of your mental health now that your whole life had changed?
Yeah. So I was going to say a few things I really learned. One, allow yourself to feel the full cycle of emotions without judgment. I think with any kind of loss, grief, or trauma, the more you bottle it in and not let it out, the longer it takes to get through the healing journey. And I was always a writer and wrote in my journal, and I was really busy in my job right before the accident happened. So I had stopped doing that. Well, I got back into journaling. And I think one of the things that helped me when I was at the burn center, because that was a struggle too, was I was posting medical updates on one of those online caregiver communities for everyone who knew us. And because I was away from home, Vincent, I started pouring my heart out into this community. So it was more than medical updates. It began things like, well, here was how Mark and I met. We adored each other. We were soulmates, and he was the love of my life. And so all these stories start to come out. And I was a really private person before the accident. And so what I found was that the more you share your vulnerability, the more people open up and can support you. I was overwhelmed by the amount of love and support I received. And there were people that were passing on my posts to their faith communities, their synagogues and their churches. And we had thousands of people praying for us. And probably just friends and family were about 500, but it really grew. And they began to talk about their medical crises and things that had happened to them. And Mark went to Stanford Business School. That group of people rallied behind him, and they just started talking about more and more of their own issues in life, deeper issues, not just, oh, hey, you were a finance guy, Vincent. Instead of saying, where can I find an acting CFO for my startup? They start talking about deeper stuff. So I think full cycle of emotion, journaling, because you got to process. And I felt like live every day in the moment. Don't, Eckhart Tolle has this great quote of, don't dwell on the past. Don't overthink the future. Live fully in the present moment. And it was the first time I really understood experientially what that meant, because you would drive yourself crazy if you tried to think, like, why did this happen? And what am I going to do, a year from now? Right. And so I really lived life in the moment, and to really find the small joys in life. Right. That was the day to day, that great cup of coffee or cappuccino. I really got into nature, during this all happened right before COVID. So we were all shut down in the world. Right. And so I found being out in nature, I appreciated it more. And because I saw the ebb and flow and the seasons of life, and I was more aware of that, it really made me realize that the only guarantee we have in life is change. And bad things happen, but good things can happen too. And I think for people who are on a downward spiral with something that's happened in their life, what I always say to them is just watch. Good things can happen again if you're open.
And it's a roller coaster life. There are going to be good and bad and the highs and lows. And you did a beautiful job at explaining that. Also, with journaling, right? The therapeutic effects, they're no secret.
Mhm.
I see it poured over into bigger than the journal. You put the book out there. When you were younger, did you ever think you'd become a published author?
It's funny that you would ask that. I was just thinking about that recently. When I was 8 years old, I wanted to be either a writer or an archaeologist. And I did neither after college. But I always journaled, and I did draft a novel about 10 years ago. And I was working on that and planning to work on it after retirement, or my second act. And I just never thought, life happens. And then I never knew that the memoir would be the first thing that would get published.
Yeah, well, the encore career, I love that. You're inspiring yourself to
Yeah.
keep digging deeper. Big shout out to
Yeah.
Michelle Prince. I coached her on her book, and she wrote a
Oh.
book on the encore career. So it's always inspiring to me to see people unlock new things as they go across life. But we're on the book. Let's talk about it. It's published. Everyone, if you're on the live stream, I've got it right here, foreverflyfree.com. Let's talk about the book a little bit.
Yeah, I got motivated to write the book because after Mark died, a number of people I knew said to me, Jenny, your posts were incredibly inspiring. And we could see it really helping people who had lesser trauma and tragedies, right? I mean, not everybody's going to go through what you went through, but people would be able to say, boy, if she could get through what she went through, surely I have a path to navigate myself through the rough seas of life, right? And so that was what inspired me. I wasn't ready the first couple of years, of course. The first year was just shock and grief. The second year was really about who am I without my amazing husband of many years. And finally, by the third year, I felt ready, and I'd been through a lot of personal growth. And the journaling helped because there was just so much I unpacked there that I was able to use in the book. So the book is really about the time Mark and I spent at the Burn Center from the day I got the phone call. Like the first chapter is the phone call. And it's really a story, I think, that's bigger than the medical updates. It's about how I discovered that hope and love are the most powerful forces in the universe. I talked a little bit about hope. Love, there are so many stories about how I discovered that love has a ripple effect. We had a younger nurse who took care of Mark, and she was so kind and wonderful. And she said to me, you and Mark have such a special love between you that it really has inspired me to raise the bar on who I would want to date. And in the end, after Mark died, became engaged to the male nurse who took care of Mark the day he died.
Wow.
So I know both of them, and they're like, we're saving our pennies for our wedding, right? We're in the middle of COVID, but when we're ready, You've got to come to our wedding, Jenny. And that really, really touched me. But I think that is an example of the ripple of love. So I have stories like that. And the nurses became my second family. So it's also a huge shout out to the medical communities, especially nurses and therapists. And after that, I do talk about my healing journey and how I got through my grief and how I came out of it thriving. And I found love again. My partner, Robert, it's a magical story how we met. And so,
You
it's
can't leave
also
us hanging now. We've got to get a little
okay,
preview
well,
of the
okay,
book.
so yeah, so let me just kind of, without spoiling the whole, being a total spoiler alert, let me just tantalize everybody, listeners, with saying before Mark and I decided to retire to Tahoe, I had said to him, look, I grew up in New York in the East Coast, Long Island and, Boston area. I love water and ocean. So yeah, we're going to mountains and skiing and all that great stuff, lake, but I still want a beach cottage in Carlsbad, north of San Diego. And here's the crazy thing. Robert found me online and he was from Carlsbad. By the way, I told no one else but my husband that I wanted a beach cottage in Carlsbad. So, interesting. I'm here in the book to just tell my story. I'm not trying to convince anybody about anything, but I did discover a lot of signs and synchronicities that happen in the world and in our lives. We are just too distracted to notice them, right? Especially in our 24/7 digital world. And so, if people would just stop and pay attention and come from a place of peace and love, I think you would notice a lot more. And I started to notice a lot about Robert and I. Okay, I'm going to tell you one story about Robert
Please.
and I
Yeah.
that's magical that didn't even make it into the book because we didn't figure it out until afterwards. We've been together about 3 years now. So, about a year ago, we realized that back how many years ago when we were both newlyweds, he was married to his wife, I was married to mine. We both worked in the same company in Santa Clara, California. I mean, this is going back 30 years,
How big was the
Anthony.
company?
10,000 people.
Oh,
And
wow.
he was a consultant from LA driving up every 2 weeks. And I had just moved from New York to Northern California. And so I'd only been in that job 10 months. But we figured we probably crossed paths, never got introduced, but in the lunchroom, in the hallway, we just didn't know. Okay, so that was many years ago, both newlyweds, right? And then 2019, we discovered we were living in the same neighborhood of Phoenix because he was there. His wife had cancer and she was getting alternative treatment in Phoenix. And I was there at the burn center and we literally lived 5 blocks apart from each other. My Airbnb, he was staying at the AC Marriott Hotel. And we discovered that he said, because we visited more recently, and he says, oh, I used to shop at that Trader Joe's. Oh, I used to go to that Whole Foods. Oh, I used to go to Pizza Bianco over there. I said, what? He goes, you mean you rented the place here when Mark was in the burn center? I said, yeah. And he goes, I was only 5 blocks away. So our friends now say it was like Robert and I were circling each other across our entire life until we were ready to meet, which was 2 years after 2019. And
I'm
he found
so
me online.
I'm so glad that you found happiness again, and I'm sure
Yeah.
the signs that all point together
Yeah.
from your late husband. I mean, I wanna know more, but I can't ask because I gotta have everybody go check out the book, foreverflyfree.com, and before I let her go, before I get the rest of her contact information, I like to end the show with a piece of advice for someone who may be tuning in or viewing on today. They're struggling and they're not finding hope. What can you offer?
Yeah, I would say definitely find community. There's a great documentary and book by Robert Putnam called Bowling Alone. Americans have become increasingly isolated socially.
Yeah,
And I think that it's really important to find a community, get a support group if you don't have a lot of friends and family around, and don't be alone. Don't walk this journey alone.
that's such amazing advice.
Ask
Thank you.
for help. Ask for help.
Yes, that's the big thing too. You are not a burden and it is not a weakness to ask for help. It is more of a strength.
Absolutely.
And I'm so glad you ended it right there. And thank you so, so much, Jenny, for joining me across the
Yeah.
country. One of the beautiful things with Zoom, and we're on StreamYard here actually, where we get to connect with people around the world. And you did such a fantastic job for our mental health community. Where can we find more about you and say hello?
On my website, of course. I'm also on Substack because I do write shorter articles there in addition to what's in the book on
Mhm.
topics anywhere from courage to resilience to trusting your intuition more. And also, I'm on, all the social media channels as well. So, yeah.
Thank
And
you
I
for
just wanted to remind everybody the book proceeds, some of the proceeds will go to support the Phoenix Society for Burn Survivors. They are the largest global organization supporting burn survivors. So,
Well, thank you for making that extra initiative. And everyone, thank you for tuning in to another episode here on a mental health break. We are brought to you today by Coming Alive Production.com. My name is Vincent A. Lansing. I'd love to hear from you. Be sure to reach out to the team. Let us know what you think or leave a comment below. And with that, we're signing off today. Jenny, thank you so much.
thank you, Vincent, for having me. It was a total pleasure.